Stories of horror, greed, and murder. Mythologies of creatures. Cultures from the deepest bayous and the thickest of woods. Rumors of ghosts and witches. These are the tales and legends of the Deep South, weaved together through the tapestry of time, out of the dreams of those long past. This is Waking Ribbons. Black Hill Sanitarium. They were driving me crazy. I had to get out of there. Do you know that when I walked those halls at night, those dark, damp, oppressive halls, I saw the other inmates hiding, shrinking from me as I passed. I had been in there for way too long. My skin became as pale as a corpse. My eyes could not withstand the light anymore. I'd had enough. Oh God, I hated those men in white sticking needles in my mind. Or were they sticking needles in my brain? No matter. That place was for the mentally ill, not me. I had to get out of there. No more silent tears. So I made the plan. That pretty little nurse in her sweet little white uniform, she trusted that I was safe and not at all violent. Misunderstood, she called me to the other nurses, who rolled their eyes at her. She brought my pills to me in my dark room. I waited. I listened as her steps came closer. She didn't even see me coming out from the shadows. My hands were so much stronger than her itsy-bitsy little head. In her hand was the key, and with it I sprang from my cage. I ran through the empty halls of this forgotten place, unlocking doors that never open. For 6 miles, I ran through the woods to the cemetery gates. I climbed the gates between life and death, and walked upon the moonlit graves. I was home, in a cold tomb surrounded by friends and death. I looked around myself. Broken stained glass windows on both sides of the door of the tomb, held up only by little strings. All the heads on the wall. Dead, yet alive. I put him there. They did not blink. They did not stir. They simply looked at me, my friends. There was Jeremiah, the gravedigger, already had 1 foot in the grave. With my help, we got in the other. I couldn't believe he wasn't stronger. There was Mary, the lady of the evening. I stopped her on her way to church to let the Reverend fill her purse with coins. She looked much lovelier after I finished removing her head. And I can't forget my friend Jesse Bell. May his soul rest in hell. Heads on the wall. Dead, yet alive. No one comes and leaves again. I had to make sure no one knew where I was. Did you know? If you die in a graveyard, the soul can escape if you lose your head. It lives on in the brain. In your brain. The Egyptians knew this well. You've got to get his daughter. Got to get his daughter. Daughter. You've got to get his daughter. Daughter. You've got to get his daughter. I have been watching Lucy all week. I've been watching her at school. I knew her schedule very well. I knew exactly when she left for home. And as she passed the large oak at the corner of the cemetery, I scooped her up. She fought so very hard, but sadly she was a little one, only 7 years of age. As she struggled, I cupped my hand over her little mouth. I spoke softly to her. "I'm not a stranger, dear Lucy," I said to her. I carried her to the crypts. I'm a friend. I'm going to take you home to Daddy, later. She screamed into my hand, but there was no one around to hear her. "How can I make you understand?" I said to her as I wrapped her in twine. "'Cause you're his daughter, his little daughter." She squealed in fear in the dark crypts where no one could hear her. Lucy's voice echoed off of the stone walls under the graveyard. "The one I'm supposed to have hurt. I stopped and watched her try to get free from inside the open coffin. "But I could never," I said, as I looked into her eyes and she looked into mine. "I could never, never hurt a little girl like you." I motioned my hands toward the walls. Heads hung along the beams above our own heads. Lucy's eyes widened even more. "I got real dolls on my wall," I told her. "I made them myself, and you can play with them." She did not react how I expected. She began to shriek again. I shook my head sadly. "You can play with them until your daddy comes to get you. I will go and fetch him to get you, Lucy, I promise." That made her shrieks die to whimpers. Lucy closed her eyes, and she seemed to faint. Poor child. I let her rest. "Well then," I said to Lucy, as she lay unconscious in the tomb, "you stay here. The tomb is warm." I motioned to the torches on the walls. No one answered behind me as I went up and into the graveyard again. "I'm not the guy I used to be," I said to the gravestones. "Not since he put me away." I picked up my shovel outside of the crypts and made my way to the 7 graves that I had picked out. Into the night I'd go, I said to nothing and everything. The sky, the moon, the owl, talking to me in the distance. "And you can't follow me." No one answered me. I began to dig. I left half my brain behind, back in that crazy place. Does that mean that I am insane? That I am to blame? "I will be your misery," I said aloud as I dug deep into the earth. "I'm gonna be your hell." I stopped to catch my breath. "Mackenzie!" I shouted into the dark in frustration. "How could you think I'd forget?" I began digging into the damp, cool earth again, until all 7 graves were empty and open. I looked across each. "All graves done," I said aloud to no one. I chuckled. "I'm so clever," I said. 7 headstones in all, saying, "Lucy forever." All night and all day, I dug the graves, filled them with coffins and bodies, all save one. Night came quickly, and I was off into town, still covered in a layer of dirt from the graveyard. He was asleep, warm in his bed, as if his daughter had not been missing for 2 days and nights. I scratched softly at first on his bedroom window. Mayor Mackenzie asleep, warm in his bed. I banged hard near his head. His fat belly shook when he jumped from his bed. I smiled and waved at him as he realized who was at his window. "Surprise," I said through the glass. He looked at me with disbelief. He knew it was me who beckoned him. "Come, Mackenzie," I said through the glass. "Your daughter Lucy awaits." I watched as the realization of my words crept across his fat old face. "Meet me at midnight by the cemetery gates," I said so that he could hear me clearly. "Meet me at midnight, or your Lucy will be dead." And with that, I left him standing in his bedclothes in his dark room, staring out of his window. As I walked quickly back to the graveyard, my new home, Lucy's new home, I thought, he is such a sick little man. He's so much sicker than me, and I am. Revenge truly is sweet. I know that you agree. You may call me sick in the head, but I would never lie to you. I worked for the man once. Mayor Mackenzie is an old, perverted swine. I caught him one night molesting his own child. His stubby, disgusting fingers. And who do you think they all believed? I reached the graveyard again. Lucy was asleep inside the coffin. Poor child was exhausted. With a soft hand, I placed the lid of the coffin over her tiny body. I lowered her into a cool grave. With ease, I covered the coffin with earth, until finally 7 graves lay before me, all freshly dug, none looking any different than the next. "Sleep tight, little baby," I whispered to Lucy's new grave. "Sleep tight below the ground and nowhere to run around." I made my way to the cemetery gates and waited for Mayor Mackenzie. My head pounded, as if I could hear little Lucy screaming in her grave. I saw him walking into view finally, his head low. He was alone. "Mayor," I said to him, "welcome." I bowed before my former employer. "Can you hear her?" I said, looking up at his fat face, still bowing. I stood up to meet his gaze. His horror was delicious. "Let me see your face, you son of a bitch," I said, spitting the words so close to his face. I gasped, feigning surprise. "I see a baby crying," I said. "I see a little tear." He did not answer. "Oh yeah, I know you're trying, but you can't stop the fear, dear old daddy." I motioned toward the graveyard behind me. "If you ever want to see your little girl again," I said, with a little bit of theater, "you better do as I say. Dear Mr. Mayor, welcome to my humble tomb. Come inside, you know you have to." And with a little bit more than a fast stride, I led an exhausted old man to the tomb. My home at the far end of the graveyard. I leaned on the cool wall as he caught his breath. His face was red with effort, even in the dark, the old buffoon. "Oh, Daddy, you're fading away," I said in a high-pitched voice, pretending to be little Lucy. "Oh, Daddy, Daddy, please stay," I chuckled. I leaned down into his face as he huffed and puffed. "The two of us are going to play a little game," I said, pushing him to his knees. He said through his heavy breathing, "You're deranged." "I think that I will call it," I said, pretending to think it out, "trick or treat." I smiled at him as I withdrew a blindfold and wrapped it around his disgusting eyes. "Let's go outside and seek. Follow me." With that, I left him in the tomb to only follow my voice. I heard him make a commotion as he tried desperately to follow just by sound. He hit his head, stubbed his foot, and fell through the door of the tomb onto the grass. I laughed gleefully at his pain. "Come, come," I said. "Lucy is sleeping in one of the 7 graves out here. Now you decide which ones are trick or treat." I watched as he felt along the gravestones, 7 of them to choose. He went for the first one, and as he dug to find his precious little daughter, I taunted him. "I can only let you fail this twice, Mackenzie. The 3rd time, you must be right." The old man's clothing quickly became soaked with sweat, and he stopped to breathe. "She could be dying while we speak. You better start digging before the worms have their feast." He huffed, puffed, and began digging again. "How does it feel to be digging for someone you love?" I teased. As he reached the bottom of the grave, it became clear that it was a much larger person in the coffin. I already knew that. "Oh dear, that's not it, is it?" I laughed. Mackenzie struggled to climb out of the hole he dug. Finally, he made it out, felt along the ground for the next fresh earth. When he found it, he began digging again. "Oh, no," I said as he reached the bottom of yet another wrong grave. "Oh dear, you failed again. That's not Lucy. That's someone else you've got, you blindfolded creep." I laughed so very hard at this. He clawed at the ground above him to get out of the grave. I walked over with my fists resting on his hips. "Mackenzie, I'm beginning to get the feel that you're digging your own grave," I said, laughing. Finally, he got a good grasp on some long grass patch and pulled himself out of the mud. "Only one chance left to save your daughter," I said as he lay on the ground trying to catch his breath. Mackenzie clutched his chest for a moment or so. I waited as he slowly stood up to his feet. He slowly began to walk toward another of the graves. Then he began again to dig. And so silent was I as I rounded his back with another shovel. I watched him try his best to lift another shovelful of earth. With a spring in my step, I quickly raised the shovel, brought it down on his head. He lay face down on Lucy's grave. Turns out, he got the last one right. With a little more glee than I anticipated, I dragged him back into my tomb and tied him down. I must have knocked him out good. And as I dug Lucy up from her grave, I sang to her. "Up, up, up from the grave, up, up." I finally reached the ropes with which I lowered her into the earth. I climbed out of Lucy's grave and pulled up her coffin. "Lucy," I said to her in a soothing voice, "I am here, don't you fear." I began to pry open the lid. "I will get you out of there so you can breathe again." I pulled open the lid, and Lucy looked at me with wide, wild eyes. I smiled at her and said, "You can't sleep forever, dear." I picked her up and slung her over my shoulder. "Come to Daddy," I said to her as I carried her back to the tomb. Gently, I sat Lucy on the floor. I stood up next to the door of the tomb. My guests looked at their freedom as I shut the door with a loud thud. Mackenzie lay on the stone floor. Lucy sat with her back against the wall. The sun was rising outside. "This court is now in session," I announced to the stone walls. I pointed my finger at the mayor. "You stand accused of child abuse, of stealing innocence and freedom too." I knelt in front of his red face. "I am the only judge, Mackenzie. I am the only jury. I am your lawyer, too." I stood up and folded my arms as he watched. "So, tell me what to do," I said. "What's it gonna be? Are you guilty, or are you guilty?" I laughed loudly. Tears streamed silently from Mackenzie's eyes. "Yes," I said gladly. "You just go ahead and cry." I took in a deep breath before I spoke. "I, the jury and the judge, find you guilty of stealing the innocence of a child, and therefore we sentence you to die. Slowly." Lucy whimpered and cried loudly at that. I knelt in front of her. "Leave it up to me, girl. You tell me when, and I'll make him disappear." I took her tiny hand in mine. "No more terrible, Daddy." Her face was red and covered in mud from the dirt and crying. "Oh, Lucy," I said, "I wish you could understand." I stood up and went to the broken stained glass window. I looked out into the brightening sky of morning. "It's almost light," I said. I looked mesmerized at the orange glow coming from the east. Before I realized it, Lucy had ran toward the window and grabbed the strings, holding the glass aloft. The sharp sting hit my neck, and I was looking at the ground. Something strange happened then. I felt my being, my very soul, creep slowly from my body. All feeling left my arms and legs and began to just be in my head. It was true. Your soul could be trapped into your head. It lives on in the brain. In your brain. And then I realized what Lucy was doing. She freed her poor father. This was not good. No! But then she did something else. I heard her tiny steps come toward me. I felt her tiny fingers on my head, on my neck. Quickly, I caught a glance in my lifeless eyes of the smiling face of a child. Then, blackness as I dropped into a bag, into the dark. Lucy, forever. I'll be with Lucy, forever.